Hello, it's Monday again, and I'm now doing the fourth episode in Lightning at 200 Durham Street. Based in a small town of Chaseford, aka Stratford, in 1928. To date, we've had our main character, Joel, struck by lightning in the first chapter. And that event actually happened about a month after the chapters I've been reading to you lately. I know life isn't organized like that. I know in life we go from one day to the next day to the next day. Time flows along continuously. But in the mind of the storyteller, that's often not the best way to tell a story. So sometimes you start somewhere and then jump back and then run your story up to that important event. And trust me, that lightning strike is an important event, not only in this story, but in the next 30 some odd stories. So today we're going to continue. The body was found in the cabin in the bush. The sheriff was called, and Constable Jake Smith was left in the cabin. What a pleasant task, to guard the body. Well, we're now to the next day, and now we have the coroner on the way. Dr. Frank Whittles, the coroner, arrived at the Darrigan farm, that's the farm of Herbert and Emmeline, shortly before 8 o'clock on Tuesday morning. He had his assistant, Bobby DeGood, with him. He went up, knocked on the door, and said to Emmeline, "I'd like to speak to Herbert if I could." And she said, "Well, if you want to talk to him, you'll have to go to the barn, because that's where he is. He's down feeding the cattle." So Dr. Whittles, Frank Whittles, walked to the barn, and when he walked in, Herbert hollered at him, "Hello, Frank, what's the local coroner doing in my barn?" Herbert and Frank had been friends for many years, so with a big smile, Herbert added, "You're just the guy I need. I've got lots of chores to do." Well, of course, Frank smiled back at him and said, "I've got lots to do today, too. The first thing I need you to help me with is I need to have you point myself and Bobby on the way through the bush, where we enter the bush, to get to that cabin where this body is that the chief wants me to examine." So they went down to the edge of the bush, and they were going to head along the trail. And I'm going to just stop for a moment here and do a bit of an aside. A couple of things before I forget. I've had a couple of people say they've had trouble finding my YouTube videos. The best place you can go is Ron Finch Lightning. Once you're on YouTube, that'll take you to the place you want to go. The other thing I want to mention is to show you where this bush is in relationship to the town of Chaseford, aka Stratford. You'll see the town in the bottom corner of the diagram, and from there you see the roads that run up through Goshawk and to the farm, and if you look carefully in the upper right corner, you'll see the cabin. Okay, sorry about that detour, but I think you need to have an idea of where these things are. So they headed off into the bush. Just Dr. Whittles and Bobby. The bush, the track has been walked over so many times now, it was very easy to follow. And in less than 20 minutes, they reached the big tree. And there was a sign tacked up on the tree with an arrow pointing towards, and the word cabin on it, pointing in the direction they should go. Well, they took a quick peek, and when they did, as you see there, that's what they're looking at. On the upper top third of the screen, about halfway across in that picture, you'll see the cabin. So they headed towards that cabin. And of course, soon they arrived at the actual cabin itself. Not that big, not that pretty, but that's where the body was. Well, when they got to the cabin, they met Jake. Jake was happy to see them. "Good morning," he said with enthusiasm. "I'm getting tired of being here alone. The only company I have isn't very talkative. By the way," he said, "did you see the signpost I put up earlier?" "The sign was legible, Jake, but you're going to have to improve your craftsmanship," said Whittles. "Anyway, enough with the sign talk. Take us to the victim." So Jake led the coroner and Bobby the Good into the cabin. "It's pretty smelly in here," said Bobby. "You should have been here last night," said Jake. "I've had all the window shutters wide open since 8 o'clock last evening. It's hardly noticeable now." "Anybody touch this body?" Dr. Whittles interrupted. "Don't believe so," said Jake. "I know the chief and I didn't touch it, and so far as I know, the boys didn't touch it either." "Okay, get your notepad ready, Bobby," said Dr. Whittles, "and let's take a look." So Dr. Whittles bent down close to the body. You've seen them do this many times on TV. Of course, this is long before TV. And he looked at the body, and he was face down on the cabin floor. Before turning the body, he looked at the clothing. He was looking for blood and any traces of tears in the material. There appear to be no wounds on the victim's back, and the clothes don't appear to have been tampered with in any way, he announced. Bobby carefully noted this information down in his notepad. "Okay, Bobby, you and I will have to turn her over." "It's a woman?" said Bobby, sounding surprised. "Apparently so," said Dr. Whittles. "Most men don't wear fancy riding outfits like this." And then he paused and he said, "Jake, did you see any sign of a horse around here, or any place where a horse could have been tied up?" "I haven't had a chance to look yet," said Jake. "It never crossed my mind." "Well, would you mind going out now and taking a look?" Dr. Whittles said. "Take a look around this bit of a clearing here. See if you see any signs of a horse that's been here recently." "Okay," said Jake, and away he went. And Whittles turned back to his assistant and said, "Now, Bobby, please note that there is a significant wound to the right side of her temple. There don't appear to be any other external signs of trauma to the body. And also note the body is not totally cold, but I don't think I'm going to use a thermometer to measure body temperature. According to what I've read, the body temperature drops about 2 3/4 degrees Fahrenheit for every hour the victim's been dead. We know she's been dead since sometime prior to the boys discovering her, about 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon. That's more than 18 hours ago. And we also know, according to the boys, there was a very significant odor at the time she was discovered. So she's been dead for quite some period of time. Now, if you'll notice, Bobby, there's no rigor mortis remaining in the body. That means she's been dead more than 18 hours. So I don't think I'm going to be able to place her time of death with any accuracy. But experience tells me that she died probably not much more than a day prior to the boys discovering her body. Of course, Bobby was busy copying all this down. These were notes that Dr. Whittles would want to refer to when he was talking to the chief of police, and he may also need to refer to them later in a court case. He didn't know, but he knew he needed the notes. "Well, I'll have to take her body back to town where I can do a proper autopsy once we've notified the next of kin," said Dr. Whittles. "But before we move the body, let's take a careful look around in the cabin here, close to where she fell, to see if we can notice anything else." So they did that, searched the floor area of the cabin carefully, and didn't find much. And just then, Jake came back, and he arrived just in time to help carry the body out of the cabin and onto a grassy area not far away. And then Dr. Whittles looked at him and said, "Now tell me, did you find anything out about horses, Jake?" "Well," he says, Jake said, pointing, "about 100 feet from here. You see that clump of 3 or 4 trees down there? Well, there's a tying post that's used for horses. Of course, there's no horse there now, and I don't see any evidence of a horse being around here in the last day or so. But I found that, and the other thing I found was I found a burn site. Someone's been doing some cooking here. And they dug a pit, they put stones around to contain the fire, but they cooked up some meals. So this cabin's been used before. There are all kinds of signs that indicate that it's not as isolated and as mysterious as was first thought. Evidently, some people know about this spot. Great place to have some solitude or have a private meeting. And I also found a trail that leads away from the direction, where the horse is tied up. It leads in the other direction, away from where we are now. I didn't follow it, but I can tell you the bush isn't very thick in that direction. Dr. Whittles said, "Well, that's good, Jake. I'll pass this on to the chief. He'll be very pleased with your initiative." And he said, "But I've got something else you're going to have to do. You're going to have to help us get the body back to the farmyard." And Jake looked at him and said, "Oh, I'd like to, but the chief said I was supposed to guard the site." "Good try, Jake," said the coroner. "But you know that when the body's gone, you don't need to guard the site. The chief told me you're to come back to town with Bobby and me." "Oh, well, I tried," said Jake, smiling. "I suppose I have to help Bobby haul that body all the way back through the bush?" "You're correct," said Dr. Whittles with a grin. "Look on the bright side. Lots of exercise and fresh air." "I hope there's a good meal in this somewhere for me," said Jake. "I'm getting hungry." "Well, as soon as we get back to town, we'll take you to Mabel's Diner," said Dr. Whittles. "She serves the best big breakfast in town. Even if we're there late, I know that she'll cook something up for a valuable policeman like yourself. And the treat will be on the town of Chaseford." With that in mind, Jake said, "Okay, let's get going." So they headed back to the farm so they could get the body back to town. That was Tuesday. Now on Wednesday, the next day, Dr. Whittles, the coroner, was anxious to do the autopsy, but there was just one problem. The problem was the body hadn't been identified. Technically, he should advise the next of kin prior to the autopsy. They didn't know who they were cutting up. And of course, they couldn't do that. So they had to keep the body on ice. Remember, it's 1928, so when they kept the body on ice, they kept the body on ice. What Dr. Whittles had determined was that the head wound was not significant and probably had nothing to do with the woman's death. But he thought, a woman dying alone in a remote cabin is indeed very suspicious. Well, Bob Petrovic, the police chief, was very busy that morning as well. He returned to the cabin the previous day, took a look around and could find no more clues. And he was sort of not certain what to do next. He hadn't been involved in solving murders before, but usually the murders he was involved with were not as difficult to work on. Maybe somebody got angry with someone and shot them or stabbed them, or it was domestic, something of that kind. And he was wondering just what he was going to do next with this. So he went and talked to Dr. Whittles just to check and see what Whittles thought of the body. what had happened to the woman. And Whittles said, I don't think this is natural causes, Chief. She didn't die from that. I think there's a good possibility of foul play here. But I won't know for certain the cause of death until I can do the autopsy. Petrovic said, you know, I think I'm going to need a bona fide detective. And Whittles said, I think you're right. That's a wise decision. So, of course, Chief Petrovic then immediately went to the mayor, told the mayor what was going on, and the mayor was very helpful. He said, go ahead, contact the London Police Force, see if they have a detective they can spare. Well, it turns out that Petrovic's request to the London, Ontario Police Force was successful. They told him they'd send him one of their best detectives, Gerald O'Neill. He wouldn't be here till Thursday afternoon, but he'd be there, and the police chief thought that O'Neill would help them a great deal. Well, let's see if that happened, because that's what I talk about the next time. The other thing I'll mention is if you wish to contact me, you can see the information there on the screen in front of you. And anyway, stay happy until I talk to you next Monday.